Hey there, folks. It's Jay Frost speaking to you from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. If you've been through this party before, you know much of what I'm about to say. So if you haven't grabbed yourself a glass of water or something yet, maybe something a little stronger, do that now. But we are going to start up in just a sec. And I'm really, really happy to welcome today's guest presenter. But before I do that, I want to welcome you and encourage you to join Nettie in the chat, who is already warming that up for us. And Melissa, oh, thank you. And you love the old movie stuff. We were talking about that just before we went live, Melissa. So thank you for the shout out. Maybe our guest today will tell you more about that. I don't know if you can weave that in somehow, the fabric of what he's going to share with us. But of course, this series is brought to you by our friends at DonorSearch. That's all you'll be hearing about them, unless our presenter chooses to mention them for some reason. But you can learn more about them, and not coincidentally, your donors, the people who make our work possible, over at DonorSearch.net. There's a lot of information there about all of that, including all their work in AI, which is very cool stuff. But there's also a whole area for the Philanthropy Mastermind series, and you'll find that all under the Resources tab, as well as our calendar, even in the podcast, which we don't advertise a lot of, but you'll find that very interesting this month because we have just conducted 7 interviews with the top award winners from AFP, all there live in Toronto. So if you missed the conference there and only about 10% of AFP members could actually make their way to Toronto, then you'll find at least some of those conversations really interesting and sometimes very moving. So all of that's available to you, again, at the DonorSearch site, DonorSearch.net, under the Resources tab. And for the rest of this, of course, we want you to stick around and engage with us in this conversation, which you can do, as you can see right now with Nikki there as well. Thank you, Nikki, right in the chat or in the Q&A. But this is also a chance to, of course, welcome our returning guest to the series, which is Muhi Khwaja. Muhi, thank you so much for being here. And before you say a word, I want people to know a little bit about you if they're unfamiliar with your work. Muhi he has all the letters behind his name: MPA, CFRE, CFRM. He's Chief Development Officer and co-founder of the American Muslim Community Foundation. Look it up. We'll make sure to include a link in the chat for you. You want to know more about their fine work. He's also trainer at Fundraising Academy, adjunct faculty at a place we all know, Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. He's been in the field since graduating from what's my alma mater as well, University of Michigan, and has been doing lots of exceptional work. Plus, he's also picked up additional degrees and certificates from U of M again, G-Town, and Indiana University. Lots to bring to bear on lots of subjects. And you can, if we're lucky, we can actually point you to a recording of a past subject he's done in the series. But for today, we're talking about stewarding donor-advised funds. It's an area that's is so difficult for most of us to figure out. And I think he'll be able to give us a great introduction to that today. So get ready, and Muhi, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jay. It's a real pleasure to be here with the DonorSearch team, and I am looking forward to sharing some tidbits that I've learned along the way with each and every one of you. So thank you for being on the presentation. I have been in the space of donor-advised funds since starting my journey in 2009. I was an intern at the University of Michigan. They had a development summer internship program, and I really learned about the different ways in which donors give. Soon after that, I was a one-person development team at a small nonprofit, bounced around to different organizations, worked 5 years at the American Red Cross as a major gift officer. And that's really where I learned more in depth about DAFs. And my identity and background as an American Muslim, really thought to myself, why isn't anybody catering to the Muslim community for their charitable giving and their philanthropy? So after hundreds of conversations with Muslim philanthropists and nonprofit leaders, co-founded the American Muslim Community Foundation. So I am happy to share some tidbits with you and looking forward to jumping into the presentation. So Jay was very gracious with his introduction, and I am really grateful again to be here with each and every one of you. In addition to my role at AMCF, I am also a trainer at Fundraising Academy. And I'm going to be sharing some of these stewardship tips that Fundraising Academy teaches regularly. So I'm going to go back and forth between learning the ins and outs of donor advised funds, some of the basics, what some cultivation tips are, and then how we plan to most effectively steward long-term donor relationships. So I'd love to have each and every one of you chime in the chat a little bit more about how large your development team is. And I think this is important for context because many of you have different size teams, and I want to be mindful of what type of advice that I share with you today. And I see Marion and Emily, one-person teams, more power to you. I see 6, 3 full-time staff, plus the CEO, great. 2 in prospect management, 2 in prospect research. This is really helpful. And I'm glad. 20, Heather, wow. That's awesome. Okay, great. Thank you for chiming in. Large healthcare foundation, 46. Okay, great. So I see we have a good variety of development teams from small shops to large shops as well. Next thing I'd love to know is more on just sharing more in the basics of what a donor advised fund is. So I found this neat graphic on DonorSearch's website. So thank you for creating this explanation. But essentially, anytime a donor puts money into a donor advised fund, I like to think of it as a charitable savings account for the family, right? You put the money in, and they will get a deduction at that time, and they're allowed to send it to the charity at any time. So they get to leave it in a will, a trust, an estate plan, pass it on to their children for them to then make decisions on where to give to, or they can select beneficiaries and distribute and dissolve the donor advised fund upon their passing. So it allows more flexibility for the donor to have more control over their giving. And it easily allows them to transfer appreciated assets in. So the stock market, if it's done well for their investments, can be their best way of giving, as it will then avoid a capital gains tax. They can leave their cash income for their vacations and other things and really utilize their assets to do their charitable giving. One of the main aspects of a donor advised fund that a lot of families appreciate is also it gives them the ability to invest their balance for future growth. And one of the unique things about the American Muslim Community Foundation is we are aligning our faith-based values in where we invest. So what might attract a Muslim family to work with AMCF as opposed to Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard or any of the dozens of donor advised funds on the market is that we make sure that we're not investing in things like pornography, tobacco, firearms, weapons, things like that. So we try to be more socially conscious of where our investments are done. And of the 190 donor advised funds, they all align that AMCF manages, they all appreciate that aspect of our work. Many entities, such as maybe your local community foundation in your neighborhoods or investment firms, charitable entities, offer donor advised funds as a service. Another thing that can be seen as a pro or con that we will be getting into as well is that donors can request anonymity. And obviously in that situation, it makes it hard to steward those donations. By default, our preference is to flip the script on what traditional mainstream philanthropy does. Many people have a critique of donor advised funds that they're hoarding wealth, that they are for the hyper wealthy, that it avoids the tax implications. And as much as those things are true, AMCF again operates on the idea of giving out funds more, because our religious principles recommend us and mandate that Muslims should be giving what is called zakat, Z-A-K-A-T. And the principle of zakat is that you distribute 2.5% of your accumulated wealth annually. So a Muslim may be expected to give a few $1,000s to hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on their wealth. And if you don't meet that threshold in Islam, you are eligible to receive zakat. And of course, many people give zakat to individuals and not necessarily to 501c3s, but there are hundreds of thousands of Muslim-led nonprofit organizations, in addition to the million of nonprofits that there are in the United States that are considered zakat eligible charities. So at AMCF, we help the families distribute their zakat, and also another term for charitable giving known as sadaqah. And it's very similar to the Jewish faith tradition of tzedakah, or the Christian faith of tithing. So a lot of things to consider if you have any donors who may be of the Muslim faith, just for you to know in stewarding those relationships. And many of those families, we just wrapped up Ramadan April 10th. Every year it changes due to the lunar calendar. So this year it was about March 10th to April 10th. And there's research from Indiana University's Muslim Philanthropy Initiative that shows that non-Muslim-led nonprofits are receiving up to 60% of their annual revenue in the month before, during, and after Ramadan. So it's a time where Muslims heavily pledge and distribute their charitable giving. So for next year, something to also consider if you have Muslim donors is including that strategy into your giving as well. So, in terms of AMCF and our portfolio of donor advised funds, we have 190 donor advised funds. We have distributed over $19 million of charitable giving since 2017. And we have given to over 800 nonprofits, many of which are, alma maters like the University of Michigan, healthcare clinics or food banks, and not necessarily Muslim-led institutions, but causes that Muslims also care about. And there's research done by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU, that showcases that Muslims are just as likely to be giving to institutions of other faiths as they are than institutions within their faith. So AMCF obviously operates in the faith and philanthropy section. And we also share our data with the DAF Research Collaborative and other places like Giving USA to try to influence more on the faith and philanthropy sector. But what I'd like to share next is just about donor advised funds overall, many of which I'm sure are supporting your causes as well. So to find some relevant research on donor advised funds, you might be able to look at some of these links that we'll share later on with you as well in this presentation. And Vanguard Charitable, they just published a report called Why Giving Matters. And it talks about expected giving versus unexpected giving. And what that means is like, what is an annual donation that a DAF may be distributing to versus a one-time disaster-specific gift. And, I worked 5 years at the American Red Cross. So think about international disasters or local disasters that might take precedence for somebody's charitable giving and encourage somebody to make a contribution due to a specific one-time need. But how do we focus on transitioning those one-time donors to becoming annual donors, right? There's a whole separate stewardship plan to convert those one-time donors into annual donors, and then beyond that to major gift donors and eventually planned giving donors. So these are all things that we know about in this field as development staff, but there's some good insights that Vanguard Charitable has shared in that report. The next one is the DAF Research Collaborative, and they partnered with the Johnson Center on Philanthropy. And they indicate that at the end of 2021, 29% of donor advised funds had less than $50,000 in it. So again, the thought that it's for the hyper wealthy, that it's for people who want to take advantage of just leaving their money unaccounted for, not getting it to nonprofit organizations. This shows you that almost half, 49% of DAFs had less than $50,000. And only 7% of DAFs had a balance of over $1 million. So you can find more information on their website as well. The third one, the National Philanthropic Trust, in 2022, they researched that $52 billion of grants came from donor advised funds. So we're very familiar with the Giving USA report and how many billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars are given annually. But National Philanthropic Trust has a good estimate of how much comes from donor advised funds. So as far as a method of giving, it's becoming more popular year over year, and the amount is increasing year over year as well. Fidelity Charitable, largest host of donor advised funds. They have 322,000 donor advised funds at Fidelity Charitable. In 2023, they broke their previous record. They gave $11.8 billion to charities around the world. So again, one of the largest institutions for donor advised funds, and a noteworthy statistic. And the last is more a resource than research, but there is a ChatGPT custom trained entity called Daffy Duck. And it's a unique way for you to learn more about donor advised funds, and it can track audience questions and learn more as AI does. And it's trained to explain and answer questions in an easy to understand format. So that resource is there for you going forward as well. Now, a little bit more about just best ways to steward these relationships. I mentioned Fundraising Academy, and this is a real resource for you to learn more about how to approach your donors and what to consider and how to build longer term relationships that are less transactional and more relationship focused. So you may be familiar with the traditional fundraising cycle of, cultivation, prospecting, cultivation, making the ask, and stewardship. But this formula focuses more on the reality of how much is behind the scenes and how much is proactive and after the fact of making the ask. So this cycle includes 8 different steps that are listed here. And in phase 1, it's really all of the work that's necessary to prospect for qualified donors. And then in phase 2, you have all of the face-to-face interactions with your donors that is really going to establish credibility and allow you to move the relationship forward. And then phase 3 is really about asking and everything that happens after the gift is given. I see the comment from Natalie about DAF initiative. would love to learn more. So if you share a link, I'll take a look at it and can provide you some insight after. I don't think I'm familiar with it at the moment. So basically, what is donor retention? It is looking at your data and really diving into those metrics and numbers to establish your goals, right? It's the number of donors that continue to give after their first contribution. I just talked about Ramadan and giving, and for AMCF, it is the main time in which we receive our donations. So I nerded out. I did some A/B testing. I looked into how we performed year over year, and I was able to recapture donors who gave in 2019. They hadn't given in the last 3 years, and I did a handwritten note to a subset of those lapsed donors and got a handful of gifts. So was really excited to see the impact of that little strategy paying off. Another thing to keep in mind is calculating your own donor retention rate. Nationally, it's about 42% for our sector. So at any given time, there's a lot of attrition, right? How can we do a better job of retaining our donors? And there is research from AFP Global. There's research from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project that comes up with key takeaways. And you want to focus on, what is that delta, that difference in giving, and really looking at donor acquisition and how can we move from utilizing the data that we have to implementing strategies for our organization to reduce the number of donors that are being lost. So I'm sure many of you have heard, and there's sources from Double the Donation and also AFP Global, that the cost of acquiring new donors can be 50 to 100% more than funds given by them. And it can take several years to break even on dollars raised versus dollars spent on outreach. But if we are able to focus more on donor retention and retain donors, it will help you spend less and raise more. So we talked about how stewardship is really about the way that we follow up with donors. And after they make a gift, it's important. And of course, if you're receiving a gift from Fidelity or from Schwab, maybe they send a check and include a letter with it that has more details of who the donor is. Sometimes you can do EFT sign up and you're seeing the transactions come in and they give you an Excel sheet with the report of who gives. And then that's the best case scenario, right? You know the donor, maybe they're a first-time donor, maybe they're already in your system, but you should be tracking that, entering it in, putting it in as a soft credit for the donor, giving the charitable foundation, whoever's hosting the DAF, the hard credit. And even though you're not giving a tax receipt, you should definitely still be sending a thank you within 48 hours. You should definitely be giving an update on how those funds were used and the best effort of making connection with the donor. Maybe you don't get an email, maybe you don't get a phone number, but you have their address. And that handwritten note will get there. Hopefully, you can find more information online, prospecting, DonorSearch, all of these tools that we have available to us. So it has to be a combination of old school and new school to get the best effort in stewarding these relationships. And the renewal rate of donors who give a second time after the first gift is 50%. So if you can lock them in for that second year gift, it's just going to increase their loyalty to your organization. So the statistics that we have access to should really prompt our ability to be future focused on the nonprofit. What are the ways in which we can get this donor to give again? And if we think about it, stewardship at the end of the day is about fostering donor retention. And that's really your retention strategy. Are you inviting the donor to come visit your facility for a tour? Are you asking them to make referrals to your organization of other people who may be interested in learning more about your mission? Are you asking them the very important question of why they gave, what motivated their giving? You want to ask these open-ended questions not only in the need discovery phase of the relationship, but also in the stewardship phase of the relationship. So at the end of the day, it's all about creating long-term relationships. And something that, donor advised funds, people may be giving to dozens of organizations. And that's just an insight into their giving habits. And these are things that you should be asking your donors. How many charities do you give to? Where does our charity rank in your top 5 or top 10 charities? To kind of see maybe their capacity, their gift giving is only at $1,000, but they say your charity is number 3 on their list. So that gives you insight to know that their capacity is more, but you need to do your due diligence to build that relationship and then create the opportunity for them to give more as well. And this is just one of the things in assessing their propensity to be a legacy donor. Getting that second gift, getting that repeat gift, getting the increased gift. These are all things that will increase the likelihood of them leaving you in their will. And it really provides insight into their philanthropic mindset. And as far as these questions go, these are things that when you have the opportunity to meet one-on-one, even if it is a Zoom or if it's in person, being able to speak candidly with them about what other causes they're passionate about, and trying to see what that likelihood of establishing that rapport with your organization is, and seeing how they can continue to benefit and why they give to your organization. Some individuals may prefer to spread their donations across several organizations, and they're giving that $500 to $1,000 to 10 organizations. Others may focus their giving on a select few and give at higher levels that are more significant to them. So again, it's asking them their personal strategy to philanthropy. Who are the decision makers in that process? Do they consult their partner? Do they consult their children? Are other people involved? And these will help your organization and the donor be more sensible in these conversations. And the more thought-provoking these conversations are for your organization and that donor, the more they will begin to trust you as an advisor in philanthropy and as an advocate for your organization. And this also provides value to the donor in their strategy. So the more you talk to them about how they give, why they give, and let's say there's donors who are transferring appreciated stock to you directly, but maybe you may offer them the opportunity to learn more about donor advised funds. They may then appreciate that advice and then utilize that to benefit not only your organization, but all of the organizations that they care about as well. When it comes to engagement, you want to think through Are they participating in volunteer opportunities with your organization? Are they attending events? Are they signing up for advocacy efforts? What is their connection to the mission? Are they passionate about the cause? Looking through what their capacity to give is, do they have the financial means to be giving more? And this all ties in the relationship building of, have you established a strong relationship with the donor? Have you invited them to meet a program officer at your charity, to meet with leadership in your organization, whether it's the executive director or the board members who are at your organization? So the more you can strengthen the relationship within the organization and the donor, you will have more success there. Now, again, this is very dependent on what information you receive from the donor advised fund host. I've had some experiences where we had the name of the donor advised fund, but it didn't align with any of the donor names that we had in our CRM. So we contacted the host, but they politely said that they can't share more information. So this is a very common struggle with some community foundations, some DAF hosts that even have philanthropic advisors on staff. So it's really about, what can you do to then showcase what your organization is doing to the philanthropic advisors, and hopefully they can learn more about your institution and be like a conduit or connection for the specific donor who gave, or other donors at their philanthropic institution as well. In regards to all of this effort, hopefully you're building trust in your organization with the donor as well. And that's one of the main reasons why they will continue to give to your charity. They have an understanding that donors will have, their donations will have an impact, and that hopefully they are passionate about the cause and the mission, and they see how their funds made an impact. And that's really up to your stewardship to indicate to them, thank you so much for your donation of $1,000. That helped us do X, Y, and Z. And when you do that, that makes them feel appreciated. And you can also ask them to make introductions to their peers, and that can increase your network through referrals and warm introductions. And of course, they're getting their tax benefit through the donor advised fund. And hopefully your organization can continue to be beneficiary of their DAF. I see a few comments in the chat, so I'm going to refer to those now. And I see the definitive opportunity, and I'm going to definitely look more into that. And I'm glad that Jay is bringing them onto the series as well. In terms of small nonprofits and CRMs, Wealth Engine, DonorSearch are good ways to bolster the data that's in your CRM. As far as CRMs go, there's so many based on budget and need that you can be looking into. So I don't want to say one over the other, but in the past, I've worked with Blackbaud's eTapestry. AMCF currently works with Blackbaud's Razor's Edge. I know that there are dozens of others that people are familiar with, and anybody in the chat can also recommend some to Marion as well. Melissa, I love your question. How do we build relationships with sponsor organizations? Do you work with wealth managers on this? At AMCF, we primarily have a referral network with CPAs, with wealth managers, financial advisors that recommend their clients to open up donor advised funds. So we definitely work with investment firms and others that are in this space to help us build relationships with their clients and encourage them to use donor advised funds. Now, when it comes to sponsor organizations like a Fidelity or Schwab, I would try to contact their philanthropic services department, see if they have a regional manager for your area. And that could be one in which you can try to establish a relationship there. But primarily, look into your database. Who is giving through a donor advised fund? Do you have their data on hand? And if not, then pursue these other options to build a relationship with the host institution. But as far as if you have the donor's information in your database, I've used whitepages.com a lot, so looking into that and just getting basic information, even a phone number, a better address on hand. Of course, always running a national change of address through your CRM before you do a mailer. All of these things to strengthen your data can really be helpful. Great. So organization updates with DAF officers. If they're willing to take that information, absolutely. Again, some DAF institutions may say that they don't provide that service to their donor advised funds. That's really why I believe AMCF is more unique, because we do. And we think of ourselves as a grassroots non-community foundation offering donor advised funds. And part of that is because I myself was on the other side as a fundraiser. So I know these challenges, and we've kind of come at it from the ground up in building that. So I think these are all ways in which you can look into trying to build a relationship with a DAF institution as well. Looking into why donors leave. Oftentimes it's as simple as they weren't thanked properly or they weren't asked to give again. But ideally, sometimes it's more in the psyche of the donor, thinking that they aren't needed, that their gift won't make a difference, that they don't feel appreciated. So all of the donor advised fund platforms that I know of offer the donor to share their information with the nonprofit, or to have it be anonymous. So as long as those donors are sharing the information, hopefully, again, you can do your best to find that information, reach out, build a relationship, and make sure that they are properly stewarded. Other ways in which you can get to know your donors is learning more about their background. What school did they go to? What profession are they at? Do their employers offer a match? Who is their spouse or partner? Do they make decisions together? More about their pets and their home and hobbies and interests. And ask about different parts of their background every time that you talk. You may recognize that sometimes connecting with donors can be challenging as well, breaking the ice, building that rapport. And there is a lot of psychology behind prospecting. So even at Fundraising Academy, we talk about social styles and what ways in which is most effective to communicate with your donor. Are they more analytical? Are they more of a thinker? Do they need to have facts and figures, or do they want a story to be told? So all of this is helpful in understanding how you present to the donors in your portfolio as well. And of course, CRMs are super important in being able to track all the data, to be able to get the information that you talked about with your donors into the CRM. So looking at the frequency of their gifts, did the gifts increase year over year? And did the number of meetings you had with them, whether it was a phone call or an email exchange or an in-person meeting, affect their giving in the next year as well? Again, you want to focus on getting to know your donors. You want to think through what are some open-ended questions that you can ask them that will increase the insight that you gain about their giving style. And when you talk to them, having clarification questions ready at hand. And they may also have clarification questions for you. Maybe they're not ready to be solicited just yet, but they want to ask more about your programs. And you may not have all the answers. So oftentimes bringing a colleague or an associate along with you on that visit so that they can readily be available to answer any specific questions, or having the confidence in saying, I don't have all the details, but my colleague does, and I'd love to get back to you about those things. So learning from the donor about how often they want to hear from you. And that's what portfolio management is about. You are their relationship manager. They shouldn't be getting the annual fund mailer once a month to their doorstep if they're in your portfolio, right? They're in your portfolio for a reason, to have a stewardship plan and an outreach plan and a very sophisticated level of touch points from the organization on your behalf, curated by you for the organization. So knowing these things about your donor is very important. I'd love to hear from everybody in the chat again. So what are some of your current stewardship strategies? Are they different for major gifts? Are they different for monthly donors? What do you do that you find effective? I'd love to hear from you in the chat. And this is a great way for other people in the presentation to also take from your ideas and see what works for their organizations as well. So some people may do a quick thank you video, a minute or less, that they send to their donors. Others might do a informational webinar that a board member hosts and invites their friends and families, and you can put your recent donors on there as well. So curious to hear what your organizations do. Awesome. Emily sent out a donor survey to ask some base questions to donors and see how they want to be stewarded. I love that. You tweak content as well based on personal preferences. Super important. Marion is new to the field and still learning. She'd love to learn more. Trying to build a culture of philanthropy, very important. 8 development directors in the last 10 years. That's really tough. Michelle says, handwritten thank yous, funder briefings, asking questions, phone calls, merch. Joan mentioned board members and write thank you notes. Great ideas. I would even encourage your board members to have mini portfolios. Obviously, they're not going to have 150 prospects or donors in their portfolio. Give them 10 to 15. It could be their personal friends, people in your donor base that they know. They can be a secondary portfolio point of engagement. But I would highly recommend your board members having a mini portfolio that they regularly thank on an annual basis at the least. Keith mentioned, since many DAF holders give to several charities. I always acknowledge that there are many worthy organizations and missions, and thank the donor for making their organization a priority for their DAF. Absolutely. Stephanie mentioned we're a private K through 12 school. At the end of the year, we give a small personalized gift that includes their student's photo. If possible as well, I would even encourage the students to write thank you cards, handwritten, design them front, back, and put in a unique phrase from the staff. I am a consultant to a capital campaign for a private school, and that was very well received. Nikki mentioned we host a hybrid in-person Zoom event to share how the grants our foundation awarded made an impact in the past year, while also sharing the need themes that came up in this year's grant applications. We also host a free event during the summer to celebrate and share the impact of the gifts that the foundation made or managed. I love that. And through that process, you get to almost hear insights that the applicants have and what certain themes are, so it can inform the donors that give to you about what the needs are in the community. So I think that's really helpful. Melissa says they've done a lot of things, but haven't seemed to matter to the donors. We're national, so donors aren't used to community. Definitely interesting and maybe worth gaining more insights from the donor. So even perhaps a survey or talking to them one-on-one about what does matter to them and what would they like to hear about to hopefully change that culture of philanthropy at the organization. Dina writes personal notes on mailed newsletters to major donors. Those are always helpful. Little PS at the bottom, or striking out their printed name and handwriting it. Keith says, please encourage your gift process team or protocol to include the personalized name of their DAF in the acknowledgement narrative. Definitely something worthwhile. And yeah, so Millie mentioned, how would you recommend we rekindle a relationship with donors in our database who we haven't made much contact with or activated in the last 3 to 5 years, but have a history of giving? This is one of my favorite things, Millie. And there's nothing like the satisfaction of engaging a past donor and getting them to give again. I can't explain it. Maybe some of you are the same way, but I love to come up with those strategies of engagement. I'd say go as far back as your donor history and CRM has access to. Your strategy for lapsed donors should definitely be different than your strategy for donors who gave last year or earlier this year. There needs to be some level of trying to re-engage them. And again, it could be handwritten strategies. It could be even hiring on staff specific major gift officers that are only focused on retention of donors and reacquiring lapsed donors, and would love to geek out further about what that looks like. I see, how do you share impact for annual fund when its purpose is the greatest need, such as operating, faculty salary, etc.? I think our donors are sophisticated. Many of them do understand that operating costs are a necessity. Whether we disclose it as program or operations or other ways, I think that as long as it's increasing the impact, as long as it helps you achieve your mission, as long as it increases the number of beneficiaries, that's what's important. And it's how you tell that story that makes a difference. Keith, I'm glad to hear that you and your wife have used a DAF for about 4 years. And I'm glad that you were able to give significantly to 17 organizations. And it's interesting that you have a name for your DAF, but your institution may not be sharing it with the organizations. So it's interesting to see how you can try to work with Fidelity to share more information with the charities you're giving to and internally pushing for that. And definitely, it's super easy to open a DAF. Every fundraiser should utilize one. It's a best practice. And you can test it out to see how your gifts are then stewarded from the charities that you care about as well. All right. Loving the discussion and all of the ideas. So thank you for bearing with me through that. Some more top tips for engagement, ways in which you can encourage your donors to give and be part of the process. You want to invite them to see your organization in action. If they can tour the facility, if they can come to an event, if they can volunteer or talk with other donors, hear directly from beneficiaries, these will all help your donors feel more valued. And to Keith's point about opening a DAF yourself, I think it's really important that as fundraisers, many of us are donors to other causes as well. So 3 keys for donor cultivation are that you should think like a donor, you should say thank you like you mean it, and you should treat everyone like a VIP. Whether you know they have the capacity to only give $100 or $100,000, the way that you treat them shouldn't make a difference. And some more tips for you through this is when you're saying thank you, you want to be prompt, you want it to be personalized, you want to showcase your passion, and you want to have a positive message. And if you do those things, it will strengthen your stewardship as well. And that is primarily what I wanted to share with you about donor advised funds and how you can steward them. And I will kind of quickly summarize some points as well. So in regards to some things, and feel free to put more questions into the chat or use the Q&A feature, and we'll transition over to those. And ideally, it allows us to think through focusing on long-term relationships, being able to reduce attrition by looking at your data and understanding why your donors continue to give to your organization. And you want to say thank you like you mean it, and be able to think like a donor, make a plan of action and follow it. And if you do all of those things, you will be successful in stewarding your donor advised fund donors. I see a question in here from Dina. Can you speak a little bit more about how DAF funds grow and are tax exempt? I didn't realize funds could grow. So once a donor puts the money into their DAF, the DAF institution is actively investing those funds. So say somebody puts in $5,000 into their donor advised fund, and they make a handful of distributions of $500 here, $1,000 there. Their balance is $3,500. The institution is going to be investing those funds and allow it to grow. So maybe the return on investment is 10%. So now they got a $350 increase in their DAF portfolio of 10%. So then their balance would be $3,850. And it just allows them to give more to the charities that they care about. So that's one of the huge advantages of utilizing a donor advised fund.
Thank you so much, Muhi, for all of this. I don't know if we have any other questions there that I can't see, but that was an awesome presentation. Really appreciate all the content. And we got that comment from Keith about loving the term charitable savings account. Thank you, Joan, also for the shout out to Muhi. Really helpful information. And whether you're in a shop that had 46 people, I think we had somebody like that, or in a shop that's you yourself and that's it. I'm sure you benefited from having a little more insight on this subject. So really do appreciate your being willing to share all this today, Muhi.
Of course. I see a question from an anonymous attendee saying, is it a bad practice to suggest using our donation page to make the gifts instead? That's primarily how a majority of your donors will give. But if you are stewarding a donor that has a donor advised fund, I would say ask them to give through their donor advised fund. It's the most easiest way, because if they are putting in all of their gifts into the DAF, that means they're getting one tax receipt from the DAF host institution. And as many of you just probably filed your taxes last or earlier this week, you probably had to collect several donation receipts if you're not itemizing. So the idea being that your web page for donations is important, but some can integrate DAF giving as well. So that's also another thing to look into.
I know that in the past that there was always an issue on the stock gifts, which are different, but sometimes not being aware of where they came from. You talked about that a little bit with trying to reach out to places where they wouldn't necessarily be able to identify who the gifts were from with a DAF. Is it helpful on those pages on your website to encourage people to reveal that they are thinking about making a gift so you can steward them properly?
Yeah, I think that's a creative way to ensure you're not missing out on some critical data on your donation page. Maybe say, fill out this form if you're going to give through a DAF, or even a stock transfer. Sometimes financial institutions don't tell you who it's from when they come in. So you have to have some sort of method that is a form that says, okay, if you're giving assets, let us know what stock, how many shares, and all of those things to better report to the IRS when it comes for the time for your organization to submit a 990.
And I do see a couple other things came in from Dinah and Clarissa as well.
Yeah. And I just looked at the definitive. Okay, there we go. And it's interesting what they do. So again, I'd have to take more of a drive through of what service they offer, but it's interesting to see how they collect the data and what they are able to share with you as far as insights go. So how do we know if the funds are coming from a DAF? Does the word fund usually come at the end? For example, the Joe Smith Family Fund. It could also be called a foundation. That's the uniqueness of a DAF, is you can name it whatever entity, and you could call it the Happy Smiles Foundation, right? And each gift is a smile from the family that they're giving to the charities. And you necessarily wouldn't know unless, again, you get the information from the DAF host institution. But many families utilize a DAF as a means to be their philanthropic family foundation. It's more cost effective to the family to call it a foundation rather than opening up a foundation with the IRS, because essentially it's its own separate nonprofit. You have to file state and federal and all of these IRS year over year. So it becomes costly. But if a family's intention is to purely be philanthropic with the foundation, a DAF is the best means for them to do so. I think it's Clarissa. By integrating DAF giving, do you mean making it a note on your website that DAFs are a way to give? Definitely. Have a little blurb on your website that shares your EIN number, shares the address to mail it to, because oftentimes DAF institutions may just have IRS search in their database that picks information of selecting the charity. But if you make it easy, the donor can input that information so that they know it's going to the right organization. Keith also mentioned DAF Direct. That's the widget that we were talking about that you can integrate donor advised fund giving directly into your website as well. And it makes it easy for them to then make a recommendation to your charity for the gift.
It does seem like there are more and more tools that are available to help people either on the giving side or on the receiving side of this equation. But it's still a
Yeah.
growing field, right? I mean, from the time that you started doing this, Muhi, to today, I mean, you talked about some of those numbers early on in the presentation about
Mhm.
how much money is going through these things and how much is given to like $50 billion.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of money that's there and can be given. They've already received the tax benefit at the time that
Yeah.
they made the investment. So it seems like there's still a lot of opportunity for us. Is that right?
100%. And two new ones that I'm really impressed with. One is called Charity Vest, and the other is called Daffy. Look into those platforms. They're great user experience. It's not with your traditional investment conglomerate monopoly, but they are unique. They are user friendly. They are a means to educate the community and broader philanthropic fabric of our country to utilize and benefit from donor advised funds.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for all of this. Muhi, if people want to reach out to you, what's your preferred way for people to find you, to follow you, and to have contact with you?
Yeah, definitely. I know you dropped my LinkedIn in there previously. So definitely LinkedIn is an easy way to connect and learn more. And I also will share on the screen more information about how you can connect with Fundraising Academy, American Muslim Community Foundation, and myself. So
Perfect. And in case someone is listening to this and not looking at it, you can find Muhi, of course, over there on LinkedIn, but at Cause Selling Ed for the Fundraising Academy, and at A Muslim CF for the American Muslim Community Foundation. And of course, his LinkedIn profile is at Muhi Khwaja, and I'll just spell that in case people are not seeing it, which is MuhiKhwaja. Again, thank you so much for this. You've been so helpful to us, not just here more than once, but to all of us in the field with offering this kind of stuff, both so broadly, deeply, but also clearly for a field that's sometimes complex as well as constantly changing. So really do appreciate you. And
pleasure.
and I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us today, whether you're doing that live or you're doing that virtually, and encourage you to take a look at the library of other content, including Muhi's past presentation, but also presentations on this subject matter, which you'll find over at DonorSearch.net under the resources tab. And if you have any questions about any of that, you can always reach out to me personally. You can reach me at j@DonorSearch.net, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And I'll be happy to respond and provide whatever information I can. And you can also attend future sessions. We have about 2 of these on average per week. Not always like this one, but definitely a lot of good content for you. So hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday. In the meantime, if you'd like to take in some of this content in your ear, do check out our podcast. I think you'll enjoy those stories very much. So until next time, thanks very much. Take care. Thank you, Muhi.
Bye bye. Pleasure was mine.